is not by picking up a sword, it's not by flinging bullets, but it's by following the example of their Lord, who is a lion, who is a lamb, who laid down his life sacrificially. What happens is as the church embraces this reality in which they overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, loving their lives not even unto death, they look forward to the day when the kingdom of this world is become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, right? And that's chapter 11 says that. It unpacks Jesus essentially making the kingdom of this world his own kingdom. But then what happens is after chapter 11, John, who wrote the book of Revelation, kind of goes back and he starts filling out what the nature of the conflict looks like as the church lives in this tension waiting for Jesus to come back. And so the way that he does this is he sees this vision of a woman. And this woman is representative, I've argued, of Eve and of Israel and of Mary and of the church. And as John sees this vision of this woman, she's pursued by a dragon who we are told is the ancient serpent, the devil. And she is ultimately, even though pursued, she is preserved in the wilderness by her Lord. But what happens is this dragon, who is a defeated dragon, continues to make war against the woman's offspring, which is the saints, the people of God. And the way that we see this played out is we see two beasts. One rises up out of the sea, and one rises up out of the land. And they represent, we said, somewhere in the realm of evil rulers and evil empires. And what they do is they press people, the people of the earth, to receive their mark. And what we said is, when you go back to this is that famous passage that talks about the number of the beast being 666. And anybody who wants to buy or sell needs to receive the mark of the beast on their hand or on their forehead. What I suggested is this is not so much saying, hey, look out, somebody's going to try and make you get a microchip implanted somewhere, right? Rather, what this is the expression and the reality of there's going to be pressure throughout the whole of history to think the thoughts of the world and to do the things of the world. Right? And so over and over and over and over again, you're going to see this reality repeating in which evil rulers and evil empires will persist until Christ comes back, and they will press the world to essentially bow down and to worship them. And Christians are called not to be marked by the thinking of the world and the actions of the world. Right? And so what happens is after John has this image, this vision of these beasts, he has another vision and he looks and he sees Jesus, the Lamb, on Mount Zion. And this is incredibly important because in contrast to the world that is marked by the beast, along with the Lamb stand 144,000 witnesses who are marked by the Lamb. And so the imagery is saying, even though you look down at the sea and down coming out of the earth and see these beasts who make war on the saints, you look up on the mountain and you see this prophetic figure, Jesus Christ, who stands with his people, and he is victorious. And as we continue to go through this, we begin to ask the question, man, whose side are you on in this cosmic conflict? And as we ask that question, we begin to see that Jesus from Mount Zion begins to dole out recompense and judgment on Babylon, which is mentioned in chapter 14 briefly, and on those who worship the beast. And as we've tracked through this, what we've seen is that this judgment takes on different images. Sometimes it's pictured as reaping or that of a wine press. And sometimes it's expressed in a series of 7 bowls of wrath, which we did on Easter. But what we ultimately see is that Jesus is not going to allow the world to persist in the way that it is going. He is going to set things right. And so as we work through the text and we get through where we were at Easter with the 7 bowls of the wrath of God, we then turn to another text that talks about God's judgment, and it's specifically in regard to what is termed the whore or the prostitute of Babylon. I'm sure in 2026, someone would likely prefer if we use a softer term, but John doesn't appear to have gotten that memo. See, the language in the text is strong, and that's why most translators use the term whore, prostitute, or harlot. But then as we reflect on that, before we jump into the text and read it, I actually think we have a little bit of work to do. So let me illustrate what I mean here. I like to sit down at the end of the day, and my girls oftentimes will sit down with me, and we will watch YouTube. And I don't want to watch anything that's crazy. We don't want to get them riled up before bed. And so what we've generally settled on is like, we will sit and watch fishing. For the longest time, my youngest daughter wanted to watch rainbow pike fishing. I'm like, sweetie, it's rainbow trout or northern pike. Like, we got to get this sorted out, right? But now, again, my youngest is really into these videos. They're called Catch, Clean, and Cook. So she sees anything that pops up that's like catch, clean, and cook. She's like, let's watch that one, right? And so what this is there's this kind of like movement towards understanding your food from kind of like where it starts to where it gets, right? We love that kind of thing in this part of the world. But with fishing, you'll watch these guys go out and they'll fish for a while, and then they'll clean the fish, and then they'll show you how they're going to prepare it and eat it in front of you, and you're like, man, I wish that I could have some of that, right? So if I were to draw a parallel, I could say on some level, preaching, and you get a little bit of an insight into the life of a preacher here. I think somebody should make a reality TV show out of that. But preaching, if we were to compare it to this, would be a little bit similar. On one hand, you got to kind of catch the fish, right? You got to actually pick the text you're going to preach. Then you also have to eventually cook the fish and prepare it and give a meal, and we hopefully sit down and eat it. But somewhere in the middle there, what you generally don't see is that most preachers will sit down during the course of a week or weeks, and they're cleaning the fish. They're essentially doing the study behind preparing the meal, right? So generally for most preachers, what you want is you want to go and you want to be in your study and sitting down and doing what we call our exegesis and looking at historical stuff, all that kind of stuff. And then you don't generally see that, right? So when we come and then we step up and we start preaching, we got all that in the background, but we're giving you kind of the finished product. It's the meal, okay? I'm going to tell you, I was going to say suggest, but I'm not going to suggest. We're just going to do this. I'm going to tell you that this morning, I think we actually need to spend a little bit of time cleaning the fish together. What I mean by that is the fish that we got to clean is understanding Babylon the way a first century Jew would understand Babylon. And once we've at least got a little bit of a grasp on that, then I think we could start jumping into the text and understanding what it means. So, in order to understand this idea or this theme, motif, city of Babylon, we've actually got to understand the history of Israel. Now, if you've been here for any amount of time, you kind of probably already know, oh man, Jared's going to go back to Abraham. He's going to walk us through the Old Testament. We've heard this before. If you could say what I'm about to say to me, that actually makes me really happy because we need to know the story of the Old Testament in order to actually understand what's going on in the New Testament well. But what happens with the history of Israel is God creates the world. It's all really, really good. What happens is humanity sins, rebels against God, and is now estranged from God. They're not in community with him. What the scriptures unpack is that God immediately begins to pursue fallen humanity to redeem them and to bring them back into relationship with himself. The way that this unfolds is in Genesis chapter 11, he calls a guy named Abraham. At that point, his name was Abram. He says, Abram, I want you to leave your home. I want you to leave your father's household. I want you to leave the land that you're in. And I want you to go to the place that I'm going to show you. I'm going to make you into a great nation, and all nations will be blessed through you. You track through Genesis, and what happens is God is faithful on his promise. Abraham eventually turns into 12 tribes. But these 12 tribes go down into Egypt, and they end up exploding, repopulating, and in Egypt, they are oppressed by the Egyptian people. They end up in slavery. God then sends a guy named Moses to lead his people out of slavery and towards the land of promise. So God brings Israel out of slavery towards promise, and he says this, you are my covenant people. I am your God. You need to obey my commands. I will be faithful to you. And if you are faithful to me, you will dwell in the land and you will prosper. Unfortunately, what happens is, as soon as God brings Israel into the land of promise, they forget him, they sin, and so God allows them to be oppressed by the nations around them. Once they start being oppressed by the nations around them, they go, oh no, what's going on? And they figure out, we have forsaken our covenant with God. God has removed his blessing from us. So they turn and they repent. God, we're sorry. God then sends them a judge to rescue them. The judge rescues them, and then the whole thing happens all over again, right? We call this the pattern of apostasy. Eventually, Israel gets to the point where they go, God, you need to give us a king. We want a king like all of the other nations around us. So God gives them a king. His name is Saul. But Saul is not a righteous man. And so he is removed from being king. He doesn't serve the Lord with his whole heart. And God replaces him with a guy named David. Now, David also has issues, and yet he is a man after the Lord's heart. And so God says, I'm going to establish your throne, and one of your descendants is essentially going to rule over Israel. But you track through David's line, and you get a whopping 3 generations before that all falls apart. And what happens is David's grandson lacks wisdom, and as he takes the throne, Israel, God's people, is divided into 10 tribes essentially in the north and 1 or 2 tribes in the south. The northern 10 tribes are called Israel, the southern tribes are called Judah. And what happens is Israel is consistently unfaithful. So God sends Assyria against Israel and essentially wipes them out. Judah lasts a little bit longer, but they persist to be disobedient. They persist to be faithless. And so God sends a nation against them to judge them and to take them into exile. Guess what the name of that nation is? Babylon. And what happens is Babylon then becomes an archetype of exile and the example of an evil city that is against God's people. So you will read in the Old Testament, the psalmists will cry out about Babylon. Prophets will say things about Babylon. Let me give you a couple of examples. Psalm 137 says this. This is while the people are in exile in Babylon. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not remember Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed. Blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. Oh! Isaiah 21, verse 9. And behold, here come riders, horsemen in pairs. And he answered, fallen, fallen is Babylon. And all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground. Jeremiah 51, 7-8. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand, making all the earth drunken. The nations drank of her wine, therefore the nations went mad. Suddenly Babylon has fallen and been broken. Wail for her. So Babylon does not stir up great memories if you are living with the Old Testament scriptures in mind. Rather, Babylon is this kind of archetypal example of a wicked city and a place of exile. And if you follow and track through the rest of the Old Testament into what we call the intertestamental period, what you see is that God actually will deliver his people out of Babylon and bring them back to Israel. You can read Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah to hear about that. So Babylon ultimately is stirring in the minds of first century readers these types of allusions. And so with that in mind, we turn to Revelation chapter 17 and we read. It says this. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. I should have done this about 3 verses ago. By the way, if you need a trigger warning, this text is intense. And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and the earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they are the beast, and the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Holy smokes. This is a difficult text. So let me suggest a few things that we can draw out of it this morning. First is this. Babylon is, in the book of Revelation, more than a city. See, it's pretty widely recognized that the base layer for Babylon in Revelation is Rome. Everybody kind of realizes John is kind of like, we're talking about Rome here. But there's more than just that going on. Lean on a couple of scholars for this. One is named Jamie Davies. The other is named Onesimus Ngundu. Davies says this: Babylon is Rome, to be sure, but it is more than Rome. She is the personification of all idolatrous human claims to lordship. Ngundu says, theologically, Babylon is found wherever there is satanic deception. It is defined more by dominant idolatries than by geographic boundaries. Babylon is better understood as the embodiment of all entrenched worldly resistance to God. It is a supernatural mystery that can never be wholly reducible to any individual earthly institution or city. So my suggestion is Babylon is not just a city historically. I would also suggest it's not just something that we're going to see arise in the future. Rather, Babylon in the book of Revelation is a reality that persists throughout history. It is the opposite of the city of God, which we'll get to in Revelation 21, and it is represented in human realities that stand against God. Babylon is any representation of human attempts to stand against God, expressed in worldly systems and used as a means of serving worldly and satanic purposes. But Babylon ultimately doesn't stand on its own authority. See, John sees this image of the great prostitute riding on a beast. The beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And we've run into this before. It's the same beast of chapter 13. And what John is doing is showing us that the worldly city rides on the back of demonically inspired worldly powers. It ends up being expressed in its totality as an evil system. See, I don't think I have to work very hard to convince us of this reality. When you look at the world in its current state, I think most of us pretty quickly go, man, things are not right. Things are not the way that they should be. And in fact, when we look at the way that the world is, we're like, it's not really close to being right. Sin has stained creation. Man, things are not going well for us when you zoom out and look at things in their totality. The world is broken. And Revelation presses us with that, saying that there is a cosmic battle, and the world, until the return of Jesus to set things right, is marked by hardship and suffering and war and turmoil because the dragon and the world that follows him, whether they recognize it or not, set themselves against the Lamb. And when you are set against the Lamb, the only direction you can head is destruction and ruin. We come back to the text, and we could say that this beast imagery gets a little bit complicated. We see that there are 7 heads, and those represent 7 mountains. That's not hard. That's Rome. But then we see that these 7 heads are also 7 kings, which starts to get a little bit more complicated. And then we read that 5 have come, and 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. And we go, okay, well, now we're in the weeds. If you've been paying attention, though, that pattern should actually be familiar. The 5 followed by 1 with 1 to come are really similar to what we've seen with the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. But the text doesn't stop there. The beast is an 8th king, possibly representing a blasphemous 8th day. And the 10 horns are 10 kings who haven't received power yet, but will for 1 hour. So what do we do with all of that? Well, I don't have time to give you every option this morning. One of the options that has been popular is a futurist option to say, well, those 10 little heads are 10 kings that are going to rise up when the Antichrist, which that word is actually not used in the book of Revelation, by the way, shows up. I've suggested before, if your theological paradigm ends up being made into a movie that stars Nicolas Cage, pulling our friends Davies and Ngundu together again. Jamie Davies says it's possible that these were real historical figures, but the figures themselves point beyond themselves. Ngundu says the 7 heads represent the totality of evil and blasphemy against the Lamb. The 10 horns represent the many political sovereignties that enhance the power of the beast throughout history. And so I lean towards seeing these figures as pointing to consistent historical realities. Things that we see happen over and over and over and over again throughout human history. And as we come back to the text, what we ultimately see is that these systems end up in a reality in which, while the beast and its kings make war on the Lamb, they are defeated. And this is a theme that we see developed through the book of Revelation consistently. The beast, the dragon, they are defeated, and yet they continue to make war. And what this points to is what we call the already not yet reality of the New Testament especially. It says, Jesus has come, Jesus has died, Jesus has risen, he's ascended and he's returning, so he is victorious. And even while he is victorious, the nature of that victory, the nature of his redemption, we see images of it in this life, and yet there is always more to come until Jesus returns. And Revelation is pressing us, saying, church, you live in this tension. You live in this tension where Jesus is victorious, but the final victory isn't known yet. You live in this tension where Satan is defeated, but he still makes war against the saints. Figure it out. Be victorious in the midst of this. Overcome. Be consistent. And what does John say over and over and over again? The way that you do this is not by picking up a sword. It's not by flinging bullets. It is by the word of your testimony, the blood of the Lamb, loving your life, not even unto death. And while we live in this tension, there is a reality in which the bestial system of the world rides on the system of Babylon, hating her and making her desolate and naked and devouring her flesh and burning her up with fire. One more time, I go back to our friend Jamie Davies. He says this: the whore is the slave of the beast, and the system eats itself. And so what we come to is the reality that Babylon is the proverbial worldly city. It is wicked and oppressive, and at the very same time is oppressed and being destroyed. Now, on one hand, that sounds like a little bit of a paradox. And man, can we not just say that we see that reality at work around us all the time? How often do we run into people who our hearts break for because the world is beating them down? And yet at the same time, we watch as they turn around and they do the exact same things that are being done to them, and they perpetuate this reality in which there's consistent destruction and despair. And that's the picture that John is painting in the book of Revelation of the world. All of these images are saying, against the Lamb, outside of Christ, there is a perpetual reality that is both sinful and worldly, and also spiritual and demonic, in which the world will consume itself. And the answer to that problem, the answer to that reality, is that Jesus, the Lamb, has called a people to himself to restore what he's made. And that's the hope that we look forward to. And as we begin to see this reality unfold in the book of Revelation, and as we reflect on this reality of Babylon, the worldly city, I think it should do two things for us. First is this: it should force us to recognize the need that we have for redemption. This is the Christian of hope. The cycle of destruction doesn't get the final word. Jesus is coming back and will set things right. Jesus is already victorious and is setting things right. Second thing that this should do is, man, I think it should make us evaluate, how comfortable am I with Babylon? Like, as somebody who claims to follow the Lamb, as someone who claims to be marked by the Lamb, how comfortable am I with the worldly city? How much am I building my hope on this perpetual system that's actually destructive? And I've been wrestling with this. A few weeks ago, I shared the book of Revelation in general has made me wrestle through this, but I like investing. And so recently there was a giant dip in the market, and I was like, it's time to buy, right? And then the market starts going up, and I start making pretty decent returns percentage-wise, and I'm like, this is great. You know why that happened? Because one nation invaded another nation, and people are dying, and the world's freaking out. Are we going to have peace? Are we going to have stability? And I sit back, I'm like, I can make money off this. And I don't know that I have the answer for how to navigate that tension perfectly. It's something I'm constantly wrestling with. But I think as believers, we need to at times stop and evaluate, how comfortable am I getting with the way that the worldly system operates? How much am I building my own stability on that reality? How much is my hope placed in knowing that, man, I got 10, 15, 20, 30 years of being able to just count on the world continuing the way it's going. And so what John is pressing us with as we look at this reality this morning is to again ask us this question that we've been asked over and over and over and over again in various ways. Whose side are you on, and where do your loyalties lie? And the question begs the answer. Christian, you are marked by the Lamb. Your hope is in Jesus. You overcome not the way the world overcomes, but the way that the Lamb overcomes. And so this morning, I think we need to reflect. Where does our allegiance lie? Whose side are we on? And do our lives actually reflect that and look like that? Like if you go from here this morning, you are not disturbed a little bit by that question. I don't think you've heard what this text is saying. I'm going to invite you to stand this morning. We're going to respond to the word of the Lord in worship. And I had poor Joyce. She's like, what kind of a song do I pick to follow up a text like this? I was like, I don't know. But I do think it's appropriate as we reflect on this to take a few moments and worship. And I just want you to ask, as we sing about the worthiness of God, are you actually living in your life in a way that reflects his worthiness, in a way that says, I am committed to